Captain Lee Do-hyun stood on the bridge of the New Dawn and watched Earth grow smaller behind them. The blue planet looked peaceful from here, but he knew the truth. Humanity had been locked away for 200 years behind an energy wall that kept them trapped in their own small corner of space. The aliens who ran the galaxy had decided long ago that humans were too dangerous to be allowed out among the stars. Today, that was about to change. 3 days earlier, a damaged ship had crashed through their barrier and landed hard on Luna Colony. The ship was unlike anything humans had seen before. It was made of some strange metal that seemed to shift colors in the light. The pilot inside was dying when they found him. His name was Vex, and he was not like any alien humans remembered. From the old days, Dr. Park Mina had been the first to reach the crash site. She was the best xenobiologist Earth had, and she knew alien anatomy better than anyone. When she saw Vex lying in the wreckage, she almost could not believe what she was seeing. The alien was thin and weak. His scales were dull and many were falling off. This was not how she remembered the proud alien races from the history books. Vex had grabbed her arm with one clawed hand and spoken in broken human language. "The galaxy dies," he had whispered. "Without you, it dies." Then he had pressed a small device into her palm before his eyes closed forever. The device contained his memories, and what Dr. Park Mina saw there changed everything. The galaxy was falling apart. The great galactic council that had banned humanity was now a shadow of what it used to be. Their rigid rules and endless bureaucracy had strangled all progress. Worlds that used to be rich and full of life were now empty. Trade routes that once carried goods across the stars were abandoned. Entire species were fighting wars they did not know how to end. Admiral Cho Hanul had called an emergency meeting when she heard the news. She was an old woman now, but her mind was still sharp. She had been young when the aliens first came to Earth, and she remembered how excited everyone had been to join the galactic community. She also remembered the day they were cast out. "We always wondered what happened out there after they locked us away," she said to the assembled officers. "Now we know. They have been slowly destroying everything we helped them build." Captain Lee Do-hyun had volunteered immediately to lead a mission beyond the barrier. He was not the oldest or most experienced captain in the fleet, but he was known for his ability to think quickly when things went wrong. The aliens had banned humanity, partly because humans were unpredictable. They solved problems in ways that made no sense to alien minds. Now it seemed that unpredictability was exactly what the galaxy needed. Engineer Kim Tae-hyung was checking the ship systems one more time as they approached the barrier. He was young for such an important position, but he had a gift for understanding how things worked. More importantly, he could usually figure out how to make them work better. The barrier ahead of them looked like a wall of blue light stretching across space. It had kept humanity trapped for so long that some people had started to think it would never come down. Dr. Park Mina sat in her laboratory studying everything they knew about the current state of the galaxy. Vex's memories painted a picture of decay and stagnation that was hard to believe. Species that had once been proud and strong were now fighting over scraps. Technology had actually gone backward in many places because the Council had banned any research that might lead to unpredictable results. That meant almost any kind of real innovation was forbidden. The barrier grew larger on their screens as the new dawn approached it. Captain Lee Do-hyun had spent weeks arguing with Earth's government about this mission. Many people thought it was too dangerous. What if the aliens decided to destroy Earth completely this time? What if humanity was not welcome anywhere in the galaxy? But the captain had convinced them that they had to try. If Vex was right, then doing nothing meant watching the galaxy die slowly. "All stations report ready," called out Commander Yu Ji-won from her position at the tactical station. She was new to the crew, but she had proven herself to be an excellent strategist. She had studied every piece of information they had about alien military tactics, and she was confident that the new dawn could handle whatever they might face out there. The ship's scientist Kang Seo-hyun was busy recording everything as they prepared to cross the barrier. She wanted to document this moment for history. It had been 200 years since a human ship had left their protected space. Nobody knew what they would find on the other side, but everyone hoped it would not be a fleet of alien warships waiting to destroy them. Ambassador Ryu Junwoo stood quietly near the back of the bridge. He was the closest thing they had to a diplomat, who remembered the old days before the barriers went up. His job would be to try to talk to any aliens they met and convince them that humanity wanted to help, not conquer. It would not be easy since humans had been painted as dangerous monsters for so long. The barrier filled their entire view screen now. Up close, it looked even more impressive. The blue light seemed to pulse with its own life and energy patterns, danced across its surface like lightning. Kim Tae-hyung had studied the barrier's energy readings for months, but he still was not sure exactly how it worked. All he knew was that it had been designed by the greatest alien scientists of their time, and it had never failed to keep humans contained. "Take us through," Captain Lee Do-hyun ordered. The New Dawn moved forward slowly. As the ship's bow touched the barrier, the blue light began to change color. It flickered and sparked around the hull like the ship was passing through some kind of electrical storm. The bridge lights dimmed as all the ship's power was redirected to the shields. For a moment it seemed like the barrier might stop them. The ship shuddered and groaned as invisible forces pushed against it from all sides. Warning alarms began to sound, and several control panels sparked dangerously. But Kim Tae-hyung had done his work well. The ship's systems held together, and slowly, the New Dawn pushed through to the other side. The barrier closed behind them with a flash of light that temporarily blinded their cameras. When the screens cleared, they found themselves in normal space again, but somehow everything felt different. The stars looked the same, but there was something in the emptiness between them that felt wrong. Dr. Park Mina checked her sensors and confirmed what they all suspected. The space around them was full of debris and radiation signatures that spoke of recent battles and destruction. "Set course for Kepler Station," the captain ordered. That used to be the biggest trade hub in this sector. "If anyone can tell us what has been happening out here, it will be whoever is left there." The New Dawn turned toward the coordinates of Kepler Station and engaged its faster-than-light drive. As the stars stretched into lines around them, Captain Lee Do-hyun wondered what they would find when they arrived. Would there be anyone left alive to talk to? Would the station even still exist after 200 years of neglect and decay? Behind them, the barrier continued to pulse with its blue light like a giant eye watching their departure. For the first time in centuries, humanity was free to roam the galaxy again, but freedom came with a price. They were no longer protected by their isolation. Whatever had gone wrong out here, they were now part of it, whether they wanted to be or not. The journey to Kepler Station would take 3 days at maximum speed. 3 days to prepare for whatever they might find in a galaxy that had forgotten how to dream. The New Dawn dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler system, and what they saw made everyone on the bridge fall silent. Where there should have been a bustling space station surrounded by hundreds of ships, there was only wreckage and emptiness. Kepler Station was still there, but it looked like a skeleton of its former self. Whole sections were dark and cold. The few lights that still worked flickered weakly like dying stars. Captain Lee Do-hyun ordered the ship to approach slowly while Dr. Park Mina scanned for life signs. She found some, but far fewer than the station was designed to hold. Where once 50,000 beings from dozens of species had lived and worked, now there were maybe a few hundred survivors scattered through the massive structure. Commander Yu Ji-won was studying the tactical displays with growing concern. The debris field around the station told a story of battles and disasters that had played out over many years. Some of the wreckage was obviously from warships, but much of it came from civilian vessels. Cargo ships and passenger liners had been destroyed here along with the military craft. A communication signal reached them as they drew closer to the station. The voice that spoke was rough and tired-sounding. It belonged to someone who had seen too much death and destruction. "Unknown vessel, this is Growl of the Thakari. State your business or leave this place. We have nothing left worth taking." Ambassador Ryu Junwoo stepped forward to handle the communication. He remembered the Thakari from the old records. They had been a proud warrior species known for their honor and their skill in battle. They had also been some of the few aliens who had spoken in favor of keeping humans in the galactic community when the debates were happening. "This is the human vessel New Dawn," Ryu Junwoo replied. "We seek safe passage and information about the current state of the galaxy. We come in peace." The silence that followed lasted so long that they began to wonder if the communication had been cut. Finally, Grell's voice came back, and it sounded different now. There was something like hope mixed in with the exhaustion. "Humans, the stories say your kind were banished long ago. How do you come to be here now?" "The barriers have fallen," the ambassador said simply. "We have returned to see what has become of the galaxy we once knew." Another long pause, and then Grell spoke again. "Dock at Port 17. I will meet you there, but bring only a small group. Trust is a rare thing in these times, and many here have forgotten what it looks like." The new Dawn approached the docking port carefully. The station's outer hull was scarred with blast marks, and several sections had been crudely patched with mismatched materials. It was clear that Kepler Station had been under attack many times over the years, and each time the defenders had barely managed to keep it functioning. Captain Lee Do-hyun selected a small team to accompany him to the station. Dr. Park Mina would study any alien technology they found, while scientist Kang Seo-hyun would document everything for their report back to Earth. Engineer Kim Tae-hyung would assess the station's condition and see if there was anything they could do to help with repairs. The docking bay they entered was mostly empty and poorly lit. The few aliens they saw moved like shadows, keeping to the walls and avoiding eye contact. These were people who had learned that strangers usually meant trouble, and survival meant staying invisible. Grau was waiting for them at the inner airlock. He was a Thakari male, about 7 feet tall, with gray-scaled skin and golden eyes that had once probably burned with warrior's pride. Now those eyes looked tired and old beyond their years. His clothes were patched and worn, and the weapon at his side was obviously well used. "Welcome to what remains of Kepler Station," he said, as he led them through corridors that had once been bright and full of life. Now they were dimly lit, and many of the shops and offices they passed were empty and sealed shut. "You have chosen an interesting time to return to the galaxy, humans. Everything is falling apart, and nobody seems to know how to stop it." Dr. Park Mina asked about the station's population, and Graal explained that most people had left over the past 50 years as trade collapsed and the war spread. The few who remained were either too poor to leave or too stubborn to abandon their homes. They reached what had once been the station's main commercial district. It should have been filled with traders and travelers from across the galaxy, but instead there were only a few dozen beings scattered among the empty stalls. Most of them looked hungry and desperate. "The Galactic Council's efficiency protocols did this," Graal said with bitter anger in his voice. "They decided that the old ways of doing business were too chaotic and unpredictable. So they made new rules. Everything had to be planned and approved and regulated. No more free trading, no more independent merchants. Everything had to go through official channels." Scientist Kang Seo-hyun was recording every word while engineer Kim Tae-hyung examined the station's infrastructure. The life support systems were running at minimum power, and several critical systems were clearly failing. It was a miracle the station was still habitable at all. "What about research and development?" Dr. Park Mina asked. "Surely," the council continued. "To fund scientific advancement?" Grell laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "The council decided that unpredictable research methods were too dangerous. They banned any experiments that might produce unexpected results. Do you know what that means? It means they banned learning anything new. Every study had to prove what they already knew. Every invention had to work exactly as predicted." The group continued their tour of the dying station while Grau explained how everything had gone wrong. The warrior culture of his people had been declared economically inefficient and outlawed. Honor codes and traditional ways of settling disputes were replaced with endless paperwork and bureaucratic procedures. Young Thakari, who once would have become proud warriors, now worked as clerks and administrators, if they could find work at all. As they walked through the abandoned sections of the station, they heard the sound of weapons fire in the distance. Grau explained that 2 fleets were fighting near the edge of the system over control of the last functioning water purification plant in the sector. Both sides desperately needed clean water for their dying worlds, but neither could figure out how to share the resource. "They have been fighting for 3 months, Grau said. Hundreds of ships destroyed and thousands of lives lost over something that should be simple to resolve. But the Council's regulations make it impossible for them to negotiate directly. Everything has to go through proper channels, and by the time the paperwork is approved, everyone involved will be dead. Engineer Kim Tae-hyung had been studying the station's technical systems, and he asked to see the water purification equipment. What he found shocked him. The machinery was 200 years old and running on spare parts and improvised repairs. It was barely functioning and would probably fail completely within a few months. "Why has nobody fixed this?" he asked. Growl's expression grew even more bitter. "The repair specifications are classified council property. Only authorized technicians are allowed to work on approved systems, and there are no authorized technicians left in this sector. We sent requests for help 15 years ago, and we are still waiting for a response." Kim Tae-hyung spent the next 3 hours studying the purification system, while the others continued gathering information about the galaxy's condition. What he found was both disturbing and encouraging. Disturbing because the technology had barely advanced in 2 centuries. Encouraging because that meant human engineering knowledge was still far ahead of anything currently available. The Korean engineer began making modifications to the system using techniques that would have been considered routine maintenance on any human facility. He rerouted power flows and replaced worn components with improvised alternatives that were actually more efficient than the original designs. Within hours, he had the station's water output increased by 300%. Word of the human engineer's work spread quickly through the station. Aliens who had been hiding in their quarters began to emerge and gather around the purification plant to see what was happening. They had lived with rationed water for so long that seeing clean liquid flowing freely seemed like a miracle. Dr. Park Mina was documenting everything with growing amazement. The aliens were not stupid or incapable. They were trapped by rules and regulations that prevented them from using their natural abilities to solve problems. 2 centuries of bureaucratic control had taught entire generations that innovation was forbidden and creativity was dangerous. As news of the repairs spread, beyond the station, the 2 fleets that had been fighting over the water plant suddenly stopped their battle. Both sides sent representatives to Kepler Station to see what had happened. When they learned that a human had solved their water crisis in a few hours, what had taken them months of warfare to fail at, they could hardly believe it. The representatives from both fleets met with Captain Lee Do-hyun and begged him to help their homeworlds, which were also facing critical shortages. The captain explained that humanity had only just returned to the galaxy and was still learning about the current situation, but he promised they would do what they could to help. That night, as the new dawn prepared to continue their journey, Graal came to bid them farewell. The massive chamber at the heart of the Galactic Council headquarters had not seen this much activity in 50 years. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the curved rows of seats, while President Nam Soo-young stood at the central podium, trying to maintain order. She was a tall, elegant alien with silver skin and 6 arms that moved constantly as she spoke. Her species, the Valdrani, had controlled the council for generations through their mastery of bureaucracy and procedure. News of humanity's return had spread across the galaxy faster than anyone thought possible. Every day brought new reports of human ships appearing in systems that had been abandoned or forgotten. Wherever they went, they seemed to fix problems that had been considered unsolvable for decades. This was causing panic among the council leadership, who had built their power on the idea that only they could maintain galactic order. Captain Lee Do-hyun stood in the defendants area, listening to President Nam Soo-young list the charges against humanity: unauthorized entry into restricted space, interference with established trade regulations, disruption of approved conflict resolution procedures. The list went on, but the real message was simple. Humans were making the council look incompetent, and that could not be allowed. Humans were cast out of galactic society for good reason, the president declared to the assembled representatives. They are chaotic and unpredictable. They ignore proper procedures and established protocols. They encourage dangerous thinking among our citizens. Their very presence threatens the stability we have worked so hard to maintain. Ambassador Ryu Junwoo was permitted to speak in humanity's defense, but his words fell on deaf ears. The council had already made up their minds. Humanity would return to their isolation or face military action. There would be no negotiation and no compromise. But something strange was happening in the gallery where the various alien species sat. Many of the representatives were whispering among themselves, and their expression showed doubt, rather than agreement with the Council's position. These were beings whose homeworlds had been struggling for decades, while the Council offered nothing but more regulations and bureaucracy. Dr. Park Mina had spent the past month documenting the galaxy's decline, and her findings were shocking. 40% of the inhabited worlds had been abandoned in the past century. Interspecies trade had collapsed to less than 10% of historical levels. Most disturbing of all, technological advancement had actually reversed in many fields, as the Council's fear of unpredictable results had strangled all real research. The evidence was overwhelming, but President Nam Soo-young refused to acknowledge any of it. She insisted that the galaxy was more stable and peaceful than ever before. The fact that billions of beings were suffering from poverty and stagnation was simply the price of maintaining proper order. General Oh Hyun-woo had arrived the previous week with a small fleet of human warships. He was a veteran of the old border, conflicts before humanity's isolation, and he understood alien military tactics better than most. What he found shocked him. The Council's forces were using technology that was centuries out of date, and their battle strategies were rigid and predictable. 3 alien species had secretly contacted the human delegation asking for help. The Thakari needed their economy rebuilt after decades of failed Council policies. The aquatic Narelli were facing extinction, as their ocean worlds were poisoned by industrial waste that the Council refused to clean up. The gaseous Forthari were trapped in dying stellar nurseries because the Council had banned the exploration of new star systems. Dr. Lim Chae-won had begun working with Narelli scientists on their first ecological restoration project in over a century. The results were immediate and dramatic. Using human biotechnology and Narelli knowledge of ocean systems, they had cleaned up 3 poisoned seas in just 2 weeks. The work that would have taken the Council decades to approve was completed before they even knew it had started. Pilot An Minji was leading humanitarian missions to worlds that the Council had written off as beyond help. Her small fleet of transport ships was delivering food and medical supplies to refugee camps and abandoned colonies. More importantly, she was showing alien pilots new techniques for navigating dangerous space that the Council had declared impossible to traverse. All of this activity was being reported back to the Council chamber, where President Nam Soo-young was becoming increasingly desperate. Her threats of military action were sounding hollow, as more and more species openly defied Council authority to work with the humans. The breaking point came when Captain Lee Do-hyun presented his final piece of evidence. A young Thakari engineer named Keth had worked with human scientists to solve a physics problem that had puzzled the greatest Council minds for 50 years. The solution was elegant and simple, but it required thinking in ways that Council regulations specifically forbade. "Your efficiency protocols have not brought efficiency," Captain Lee Do-hyun told the assembled representatives. "They have brought stagnation and death. You have spent 2 centuries trying to eliminate the unpredictable elements of life, but those elements are what make life worth living. You have created a galaxy of order, but it is the order of the grave." President Nam Soo-young's response was swift and final. She declared humanity to be in violation of galactic law and ordered the Council fleet to destroy all human vessels. The chamber erupted in chaos as representatives from dozens of species protested the decision, but the president ignored them all. The battle began 3 days later in the neutral zone between Council space and the human fleet. President Nam Soo-young had assembled the largest military force seen in decades. Over 500 warships representing the combined might of the galactic government faced off against 30 human vessels led by General Oh Hyun-woo. The Council forces attacked in perfect formation using battle plans that had been approved by committees and tested in simulations. They moved with mechanical precision and followed their orders exactly as written. It should have been an overwhelming victory, but something went wrong almost immediately. General Oh Hyun-woo had studied the Council's military doctrine and found it predictable to the point of absurdity. Every move was telegraphed by regulation, and every response was mandated by protocol. The human fleet scattered in seemingly random directions, confusing the alien commanders who were expecting a traditional battle formation. The first council ships to be disabled were victims of their own rigid thinking. They continued following attack patterns that were obviously failing because their orders gave them no flexibility to adapt. Human ships that should have been destroyed easily slipped through their formations like ghosts. But the real shock came when individual alien ships began to break formation and refuse orders. The crews of these vessels had been listening to reports of human activities across the galaxy, and they had started to question whether the Council was really acting in their best interests. Commander Yu Ji-won had predicted this would happen. Her analysis of alien psychology suggested that many species were only supporting the Council out of fear and habit rather than genuine loyalty. When faced with an alternative, they would be quick to switch sides. The defections started slowly, with just a few ships withdrawing from the battle. But as more aliens saw their comrades changing sides, the trickle became a flood. Within hours, half of the Council fleet had either surrendered or joined the human forces. President Nam Soo-young watched her grand military action collapse in real time from the bridge of her flagship. She had expected a quick victory that would prove Council superiority once and for all. Instead, she was witnessing the final collapse of the system she had spent her life defending. The battle officially ended when the President's own flagship was boarded by a joint team of humans and aliens, working together. She was not harmed, but she was placed under arrest for crimes against galactic civilization. The charges included negligent genocide, suppression of scientific progress, and economic terrorism. General Oh Hyun-woo accepted the surrender of the remaining Council forces with dignity and respect. He understood that most of these beings were not evil, just trapped in a system that had forgotten how to change. Many of them would become valuable allies in the work that lay ahead. As news of the Council's defeat spread across the galaxy, spontaneous celebrations broke out on hundreds of worlds. Species that had been oppressed for decades began to tear down the bureaucratic structures that had controlled their lives. The revolution had begun, and there was no going back. The age of rigid order was ending, and a new age of creative chaos was about to begin. Director Shin Young-ho stood on the observation deck of Kepler Station and watched the transformation taking place before his eyes. Where once there had been empty docking bays and dark corridors, there was now bustling activity as ships from dozens of species came and went carrying supplies and people to worlds that had been abandoned for decades. The station had become the unofficial headquarters of the Great Reconstruction and the hub of a new kind of galactic civilization. 6 months had passed since the fall of the Galactic Council, and the work of rebuilding had begun immediately. But this was not the kind of top-down reconstruction that the Council would have attempted. Instead of grand plans and massive bureaucracies, the humans had introduced something revolutionary. They called it distributed problem-solving, and it was changing everything. Engineer Bae Hiram was working with a team of mixed-species engineers to rebuild the hyperspace network that connected the galaxy's inhabited systems. The old network had been allowed to decay for generations because the Council had declared maintenance too expensive and upgrades too risky. Now teams of humans and aliens were working together to not just repair the system but to make it better than it had ever been. The key difference was in how they approached problems. Where the Council would have formed committees to study issues for years before implementing approved solutions, the reconstruction teams were encouraged to experiment and fail fast. When something did not work, they tried something else immediately, rather than spending months analyzing why the first attempt had failed. Song Jin-woo had set up medical centers on 17 worlds in the past 3 months. Each center was staffed by mixed teams of human doctors and alien healers who shared knowledge freely instead of hoarding their expertise behind professional barriers. The results were dramatic. Diseases that had plagued entire species for generations were being cured by combining human medicine with alien understanding of biology. The most revolutionary change was happening in education. Teacher Wan Era had established innovation centers on 50 worlds where young beings of all species could learn what humans called creative thinking. For the first time in centuries, alien children were being encouraged to ask questions that had no predetermined answers and to imagine solutions that had never been tried before. The response from young aliens was immediate and enthusiastic. They embraced human teaching methods with an eagerness that surprised even their human instructors. Generations of beings who had been taught that there was only one right way to do anything suddenly discovered that there could be dozens of right ways, and that finding new ones was not just allowed but celebrated. But not everyone was happy with the changes. Many older aliens who had built their careers within the council system were struggling to adapt to a world where rigid procedures and established hierarchies no longer mattered. Some of them had formed resistance groups that opposed human influence and called for a return to the old ways. The resistance had attempted several assassination attacks on human leaders, but these had been poorly planned and easily thwarted. The would-be assassins had followed the same bureaucratic approach to violence that the council had used for everything else. They filed plans and followed procedures, and gave their targets plenty of advance warning. Captain Lee Do-hyun had survived 3 such attempts, and each time his alien security team had been able to predict exactly what the attackers would do, based on their rigid adherence to traditional methods. The captain used these failed attacks as teaching moments to show how creative thinking could overcome even well-organized opposition. The real breakthrough in changing galactic culture came when a mixed team of human and alien scientists solved what had been called the void physics problem. For 70 years, the greatest minds in the galaxy had struggled to understand why certain regions of space seemed to drain energy from passing ships. The Council had declared these regions off-limits and banned all research into their nature. Scientist Han Kyung-min had approached the problem differently. Instead of trying to understand why the void regions behaved as they did, he asked what would happen if they were supposed to behave that way. Working with Forthari physicists who understood energy in ways that solid matter beings could not, he discovered that the void regions were not draining energy, but converting it into a form that could be used for faster-than-light travel. The discovery revolutionized galactic transportation and opened up vast regions of space that had been inaccessible for generations. More importantly, it showed that problems the Council had considered unsolvable could be resolved by asking different questions and thinking in new ways. Director Shin Young-ho was coordinating reconstruction efforts across hundreds of worlds, and he was amazed by how quickly things were changing. Trade routes that had been abandoned for decades were reopening as species rediscovered the benefits of free exchange. Worlds that had been isolated and dying were suddenly thriving as new ideas and technologies flowed freely between them. The economic transformation was perhaps the most dramatic change of all. The Council's rigid control systems had created artificial scarcities and prevented efficient distribution of resources. Now that beings were free to trade and innovate without approval from distant bureaucrats, prosperity was returning to regions that had been poor for generations. But the humans were careful not to simply replace Council authority with human authority. Instead, they encouraged each species and each world to find solutions that worked for their specific circumstances. The goal was not uniformity, but diversity. Not control, but creativity. Medic Song Jinwoo had established mobile medical units that traveled between worlds, sharing knowledge and providing emergency care where it was needed most. These units were staffed by volunteers from many species who worked together, despite having very different approaches to healing. The cooperation between different medical traditions was producing results that surpassed what any single approach could achieve. Engineer Bae Hiram's teams had discovered that the hyperspace network could be expanded far beyond what the Council had ever imagined. By combining human engineering with alien understanding of space-time geometry, they were able to create stable pathways to regions of the galaxy that had never been explored. Each new connection brought contact with isolated civilizations that had been cut off from galactic society for centuries. Teacher Wanera was seeing the most profound changes in the young aliens who attended her innovation centers. Children who had been taught from birth that questioning authority was wrong were now eagerly challenging their instructors and proposing new solutions to old problems. The generational divide was creating tension in many families, but it was also driving rapid social change. The old aliens who had spent their lives within the Council system were finding it difficult to adapt, but many of them were trying. They attended retraining programs where humans taught them how to think flexibly and approach problems from multiple angles. Some of them struggled with concepts that seemed natural to younger beings, but those who succeeded often became the most enthusiastic converts to the new way of doing things. 5 years after the fall of the Council, the galaxy was transformed, beyond recognition. Wars that had raged for decades had ended not through military victory, but through creative solutions that gave all sides what they actually needed, rather than what they thought they wanted. Planets that had been barren wastelands were green and thriving again, thanks to ecological restoration projects that combined the best knowledge from many species. The formal dissolution of the Galactic Council happened not with violence or revolution, but with a simple vote. The remaining council members acknowledged that their system had failed, and agreed to transfer authority to the new Galactic Federation that was being established based on cooperation rather than control. Director Shin Young-ho had been elected as the first coordinator of the Federation, not because he sought power, but because all the member species trusted him to help them work together effectively. His job was not to rule, but to facilitate communication and cooperation between beings who had very different ways of seeing the universe. As he stood on the observation deck of Kepler Station and watched ships from across the galaxy coming and going in peaceful commerce, he reflected on how much had changed. The galaxy was no longer a collection of isolated worlds controlled by distant bureaucrats. It was a living community of diverse beings working together to solve problems and explore possibilities that none of them could achieve alone. The age of rigid order was over, and the age of creative cooperation had begun. Chancellor Park Dong-hyun walked through the gardens of New Harmony Station and marveled at what had been accomplished in just 10 years. The station orbited a star at the very center of the galaxy and served as the meeting place for the Galactic Federation. But unlike the old council headquarters with its sterile corridors and rigid hierarchies, New Harmony was designed to celebrate diversity and encourage creativity. The gardens themselves were a perfect example of the new galactic civilization. Plants from hundreds of worlds grew together in impossible combinations that should not have worked, but somehow created beauty beyond anything a single species could have imagined. Thakari warrior trees stood beside delicate Narelli water flowers, while Vorthari energy plants created patterns of light that danced through the air like living music. Trade had increased by 400% since the fall of the Council, and the galaxy was more prosperous than it had been in centuries. But more importantly, the quality of life for ordinary beings had improved dramatically as species shared their knowledge and worked together to solve common problems. Captain Moon Soyeon was preparing for the launch of the first mixed species exploration vessel in galactic history. The ship called Unity carried crew members from 23 different species, and its mission was to explore the regions beyond the galactic rim, where no one had ever traveled before. It represented everything the new Federation stood for: cooperation instead of competition, exploration instead of stagnation, hope instead of fear. The Unity was also a testament to how much technology had advanced now that scientific research was free from the Council's restrictions. Combining human engineering with the best innovations from dozens of species had produced advances that surpassed anything achieved in the previous 2 centuries. The ship could travel farther and faster than any vessel before it while maintaining perfect environmental conditions for its diverse crew. Scientist Han Kyungmin had made breakthrough after breakthrough in the past 5 years, as he worked with alien researchers who brought completely different perspectives to universal problems. His latest discovery promised to revolutionize energy production by tapping directly into the quantum foam that underlied all of space-time. The implications were staggering. Unlimited clean energy for every world in the galaxy, but perhaps the greatest achievement was in the area of conflict resolution. Wars that had once seemed impossible to end were being resolved through creative diplomacy that found solutions everyone could live with. Ambassador Lee Hee-jin had become famous throughout the galaxy for her ability to help opposing sides discover common ground they never knew existed. The most dramatic example had been the centuries-old conflict between the Makran Empire and the Stellar Commonwealth. These two massive civilizations had been fighting over resource rights for so long that most beings had forgotten what the war was originally about. Traditional diplomacy had failed repeatedly because both sides demanded total victory. Lee Hee-jin had approached the problem differently. Instead of trying to divide the disputed resources, she had worked with scientists from both civilizations to find ways to create new resources that neither side had previously considered. The solution involved establishing joint colonies in previously uninhabitable regions of space where both cultures could thrive without competing for the same planets. The peace treaty was signed just 3 years after the first contact between human diplomats and the warring empires. What made it even more remarkable was that both sides felt they had gotten everything they wanted while giving up nothing they truly needed. Chancellor Park Dong-hyun had been chosen to lead the Federation not because he sought power, but because he understood how to help different species work together effectively. His government was based on the principle that diversity of thought led to better solutions than uniformity of opinion. Every major decision was made by committees that included representatives from as many different cultures and ways of thinking as possible. The results spoke for themselves. In 10 years, the Federation had eliminated poverty on over 300 worlds. They had restored ecological balance to dying planets and opened up new regions of space for exploration and settlement. Most importantly, they had created a galactic civilization based on cooperation and creativity rather than fear and control. But the greatest test of the new system came when long-range sensors detected something unprecedented. A massive fleet of unknown ships was approaching the galaxy from the void between star clusters. The vessels were clearly military in nature, and they ignored all attempts at communication. Intelligence analysis suggested they belonged to a hostile civilization that had been expanding through conquest for thousands of years. The old Galactic Council would have responded with threats and military buildup, followed by either appeasement or devastating war. The Federation chose a different path. Instead of preparing for battle, they prepared for understanding. Captain Moon Soyeon volunteered to lead the Unity on a diplomatic mission to make contact with the approaching fleet. Her crew included specialists in xenopsychology, linguistics, and cultural analysis, along with the best military minds in the galaxy. Their job was to understand what the invaders wanted and find a way to give it to them without sacrificing Federation principles. The first contact took place at the edge of the galactic rim, where the Unity met the lead ships of the invasion fleet. The aliens called themselves the Hegemony, and they had conquered dozens of smaller galaxies over the millennia. Their society was based on rigid hierarchy and absolute obedience to central authority. They viewed diversity as weakness and creativity as dangerous chaos. Ambassador Lee Hyejin led the negotiation team, and what she discovered was both shocking and familiar. The hegemony was essentially what the old Galactic Council might have become if taken to its logical extreme. They had achieved perfect order by eliminating all unpredictability from their civilization, but in doing so they had also eliminated growth, innovation, and ultimately joy. The hegemony leaders expected the Federation to either surrender immediately or fight a hopeless war against superior numbers. They were not prepared for a third option. The Federation offered to share their knowledge and technology freely in exchange for peaceful coexistence. More radically, they invited hegemony citizens to visit Federation worlds and see for themselves what life could be like in a free society. The hegemony commanders were suspicious of Federation motives, but they were also curious about the reports their scouts brought back. Federation worlds were not just prosperous, they were happy. Beings from different species worked together without coercion and seemed to genuinely enjoy their lives. This was so foreign to hegemony experience that many of their leaders assumed it had to be some kind of elaborate deception. Scientist Han Kyung-min worked with Federation engineers to demonstrate their latest technologies to hegemony observers. The quantum energy systems that powered Federation worlds were centuries ahead of anything the hegemony possessed, despite their vast military might. More importantly, the Federation was willing to share these advances freely, rather than hoarding them as weapons. The breakthrough came when a group of young hegemony officers were invited to attend one of Wanera's innovation centers. These beings had spent their entire lives following orders without question, but suddenly they were encouraged to think for themselves and propose new solutions to old problems. The experience was transformative for many of them. Within months, hegemony ships were defecting to join the Federation fleet. Entire planets within the hegemony were requesting Federation assistance in establishing their own democratic governments. The invasion that was supposed to conquer the galaxy instead became a liberation movement that freed the hegemony's own citizens from centuries of oppression. The war that never happened ended when the hegemony's own people overthrew their authoritarian government and requested membership in the Federation. The former enemies became the newest member species of the galactic community, and their military technology combined with Federation innovation opened up possibilities that neither side could have achieved alone. Chancellor Park Dong-hyun stood in the gardens of New Harmony Station 5 years later and watched children from dozens of species playing together in ways their parents could never have imagined. Human children learned Vorthari energy manipulation, while Thakari youngsters practiced Norelli swimming techniques. Former hegemony youth who had never been allowed to play at all were discovering the joy of games and laughter. The galaxy had been transformed from a collection of isolated and competing civilizations into a thriving community of diverse beings working together toward common goals. Trade and communication flowed freely between worlds that had once been mortal enemies. Scientific advances were shared openly rather than hidden as military secrets. Captain Moon Soyeon's exploration missions had discovered over 200 new civilizations beyond the galactic rim, and every one of them had been invited to join the Federation as equal partners. Some had declined, preferring to maintain their independence, but even they maintained friendly relations and regular communication with Federation worlds. The Unity had become the flagship of a growing exploration fleet that was mapping regions of space that had never been explored before.